She was dismissed the moment she stepped into the Thornhill mansion, where the reading of the will was taking place. An old gray linen dress, a faded green cardigan, and quiet flat shoes, just enough to make the room full of heirs clad in silks and sparkling diamonds, cast her disdainful looks, sharp smiles hiding behind the mask of politeness. A man wearing a yellow tie spoke first, half laughing, half mocking. "Who let the maid in?" A young woman, her lips painted bright red and eyes as cold as ice, leaned in and whispered to her friend, "Probably some failed ex-lover, here to claim a share." Ivy Walker stood motionless at the back of the room, her hand lightly gripping the strap of her faded bag. She didn't respond, didn't back down, didn't utter a word in defense. To them, she was nothing but a shadow. A stranger in a room built on wealth, status, and the right bloodline. But they were wrong, for the woman standing silently before their storm of contempt was the lawful wife of Logan Thornhill, the very person all of them were eagerly waiting to divide the inheritance with. And today's will reading was not a simple ritual, it was a trap, a test crafted by the very hands of the woman they had just insulted. The old linen dress brushed lightly across the marble floor as Ivy Walker, the slim black woman with silent steps, crossed the grand threshold of Thornhill Mansion. On her shoulder, the faded cardigan drooped, as if it, too, could feel its owner's displacement in this glamorous space. No one greeted her. No one looked at her as an equal. The first looks shot toward her were like icy arrows, sharp, probing, and filled with contempt that needed no disguise. Preston Reed, standing near the fireplace with a glass of champagne, squinted at her, his mouth twisting into a mocking smile. Marissa Reed, in a fiery red dress like blood, glanced Ivy up and down, then leaned in to whisper in Preston's ear, her voice sweet like poison. The maid must have taken a wrong turn. From across the room, Clara Simmons, the TikTok famous granddaughter, giggled. She secretly raised her phone, quickly snapping a few photos of Ivy, then turned her head to Elise Carter and whispered, "Look at that cardigan. Vintage disaster. Looks like a poor ex-girlfriend in a cheap movie." The laughter spread like sharp little knives slicing through the air. But Ivy didn't stop. She didn't turn back. She simply tightened her grip on her modest fabric bag and walked straight ahead, her old, worn shoes making no sound on the shiny stone floor. The Thornhill mansion that day felt like a foreign world, full of those dressed in designer clothes, wearing diamonds, crowned by money and arrogance. And in the midst of them, Ivy was like a fragile blade of grass stepping into a stormy night. The crystal chandelier above sparkled brightly, reflecting off each face. But no light touched Ivy's eyes, deep brown eyes, silently carrying things that no one in the room was subtle enough to see. They saw a faded dress. They saw a nameless bag. They saw a quiet black girl. And they immediately concluded, no worth, doesn't belong, doesn't deserve to be here. To them, Ivy was just a stain on the red carpet they were stepping on, a laughable mistake in the grand picture of the will reading that they believed they were ready to inherit. No one knew, no one guessed. The very person they were mocking would not only take away the kingdom they dreamed of, she would expose the true faces of each person in that suffocating room. But for now, Ivy stood silently, leaning against the wall by the large window. The wind from the Thornhill hills slipped through the glass, gently ruffling the stray hairs falling on her forehead. She remained silent. But that silence was not one of submission. It was the silence of a storm waiting to erupt. The pale light of an April morning filtered through the window, casting a faint yellowish hue over the room in Thornhill Mansion. But no light was enough to warm the chilling atmosphere that sent shivers down one's spine. Preston Reed, still standing arrogantly by the fireplace, straightened his flashy yellow tie before letting out a half-laugh, half-scoff. "God, who let the maid in here like this?" His voice rang out clearly, deliberately undiminished, like a stone thrown into the silence. A mocking laugh echoed from the opposite side. Marissa Reed, Preston's sister in a blood-red dress, elegantly adjusted her champagne glass as if she herself were the embodiment of the noble Thornhill lineage. Or, maybe, the cleaning lady heard rumors about our wealth and decided to try her luck? Marissa's words came like a sharp knife, sparking laughter from the group standing near the fireplace. Heads turned toward Ivy. This time, not just a glance, but an outright attack with eyes, with laughter, with contempt. From the corner of the room, Clara Simmons, the TikTok-famous granddaughter, squinted, lifted her phone, and aimed the lens directly at Ivy. Snap, snap, snap. Clara tapped quickly on the screen, the corners of her mouth curling with glee. In less than a minute, the photo of Ivy, the black woman in the old dress, standing lost among the opulence of the room, was up on Clara's social media, accompanied by a biting caption. "Found Logan's long-lost side chick. Thornhill trash." Clara's laughter echoed, sharp as breaking glass. "Let's see how many likes in 5 minutes," she whispered to her friend, Elise Carter, the former financial assistant at Thornhill Corporation, who was laughing so hard she nearly choked on her champagne. Elise didn't hold back. She pretended to drop her napkin, walking past Ivy, quickly glancing at her old bag before speaking with a voice dripping with both pity and mockery. "Guess she brought a lunchbox for the buffet party." The wave of mockery, small but toxic, quickly spread. Each word was like a sharp, sweet knife, cutting through Ivy's dignity. But she remained still, hands firmly gripping the straps of her bag, amber eyes unblinking. From the cocktail table across the room, Trevor Monroe, an unpopular distant cousin, raised an eyebrow in amusement, waving for his friends to come over. "Hey, look at this! Logan's charity project came to claim their share." The group erupted in laughter. The sound of glasses clinking filled the air as fingers adorned with gold rings held their drinks. Everyone laughed. Everyone contributed. And no one asked, "Who is she?" They didn't need to know. In their eyes, Ivy's skin color, her faded clothes, and her proud silence automatically placed her in the lowest of the low. They saw only what they wanted to see, and used their words like dirty pebbles to throw at her. But Ivy didn't avoid it. She didn't bow her head, she didn't explain. She simply tightened her grip on her bag, her gaze as still as a lake before a storm, standing firm. While the atmosphere in the room grew denser, heavier with malicious laughter, phones flickered their screens like flashlights, scrutinizing her in the dark. On social media, Clara's post began to explode. "Who is this, seriously? Thrift store chic won't get you a spot in the will, sweetheart. This Thornhill house is really something for charity." Inside the room, the expensive white rose vases trembled in the breeze. Yet none of them felt the real storm quietly brewing in the heart of the room. A storm named Ivy Walker. The sparkling chandelier light reflected off phone screens, swirled in the champagne glasses, and danced in the eyes of those brightened by cruelty. Soft laughter, malicious whispers, and self-satisfied smirks spread like poisonous smoke, filling the lavish yet decaying atmosphere of Thornhill Mansion. The pictures taken of Ivy, each one from a different angle, from far to near, continued to be posted, shared, and commented on at a dizzying speed. The venomous captions, like sharp knives, cut through Ivy's silence. "Wrong charity event room, poor girl." The poverty costume party has begun. Thornhill Estate needs to upgrade security ASAP. Each beep from a phone was like a hammer, driving the prejudice they had hastily imposed on the black woman in the faded dress deeper. And amidst the rain of insults pouring down, Elise Carter, in her sparkling silver evening gown and perfectly curled blonde hair, took another step in this cruel game. A calculating smirk appeared on her carefully made-up face. Elise grabbed a napkin from the cocktail table, pretended to wipe her hands, and discreetly pulled a Sharpie from her purse. She scrawled 2 large words across the napkin. Charity case, a charity beggar. With a face so innocent it was almost shameless, Elise wandered toward Ivy, pretending to bend down to pick something up. Then, very quickly, very skillfully, she slipped the napkin into the strap of Ivy's bag. A small, nearly invisible movement under the chandelier's light, but enough for Clara and Trevor standing nearby to spot it and burst into laughter. Trevor Monroe clapped loudly. "Oh my God, this has to be recorded in Thornhill history. Who needs assets when we have free entertainment?" Clara Simmons, holding her phone, tapped Elise's shoulder with the other hand, laughing so hard she could hardly breathe. "I'm posting this on TikTok," she chirped, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She zoomed in on Ivy's bag, where the white napkin peeked out, the black scribbled words like a stain on the fabric. Within less than a minute, the video was edited and neatly posted, with mocking background music and the caption, "Spotted, Thornhill's new charity mascot. Donations accepted at the door." As soon as the video was uploaded, the notifications of likes and comments flooded in like a waterfall. Those out there, people who had never known Ivy Walker, never seen her face except as a few pixels on a screen, joined the wolves, cheering, commenting, and condemning. Meanwhile, inside the lavish room, the air was thick with cruelty. No one stopped it. No one spoke up. No one, even those in sharp suits or women drowning in diamond jewelry, looked at the injustice with sorrow. They just laughed. They cheered. They continued throwing stones with their eyes, their whispers, and their gestures of contempt. A middle-aged man in a striped suit, Gerald Hayes, stepped closer, intentionally standing in front of Ivy, then turned to speak loudly for the whole room to hear. When did Thornhill Estate start a charity room? Laughter erupted. A few people even pulled out their phones, recording Ivy's reaction as if they were filming a circus act. A beep came from Clara's phone. She exclaimed with delight, 3,000 views in 3 minutes. Oh my God, this is pure gold content. Trevor didn't hold back, tearing another piece of paper from the napkin and scribbling, "Will work for inheritance." The group burst out laughing as he slyly stuck it onto the back of Ivy's old cardigan. Amidst all the chaos, Ivy Walker remained standing, motionless. She didn't swipe it away, she didn't shout, she didn't argue, she didn't shed a single tear. Her dark brown eyes quietly gazed out the window, where the misty hills in the distance swayed with the April winds, rolling over the lush green grass, free and unyielding. And that silence, that was not weakness but absolute resolve, only fueled the anger and aggression inside the room. Marissa Reed squinted at Ivy for a long time, then whispered into Preston's ear, "She's so thick-skinned. Doesn't she feel ashamed?" Preston smirked. "Don't worry. When Grayson arrives, he'll throw her out right in front of all of us. Let's see how she holds her head high then." Clara giggled. "Hope the lawyer records that moment. Who knows, we could sell the footage for a reality TV show." A simultaneous laugh echoed. It reverberated through the grand hall, where the oil paintings of past Thornhill generations seemed to look down, not with pride, but with shame. And in a small corner, beneath the dim light from the chandelier, Ivy Walker, the black girl who had been scorned by the entire room, still stood there. She didn't need to say anything, because her silence right now was remembering every face, every word, every glance, and every invisible wound, every spiritual knife. Soon, it would become an indictment no one in this room could escape. The atmosphere in the grand hall of Thornhill Mansion, after the burst of mocking laughter and surreptitious insults, did not ease. On the contrary, it began to thicken, like a dark cloud quietly gathering, gradually reeking of blatant disdain. Disdain no longer masked under a fragile veil of politeness, but now expressed in cold glances and words as sharp as knives, flowing freely without hesitation. Gerald Hayes, a seasoned investor who had been tied to Logan Thornhill for decades, slowly set his champagne glass down on the marble table, subtly adjusted his suit jacket, and walked toward Ivy with a heavy gait, as if carrying a sentence long sealed within his chest. Beside him, Patricia Hayes, a woman adorned with sparkling emerald jewelry, followed with an icy, superior air, her gaze sweeping over Ivy as if evaluating a worthless, trivial object in the room. Gerald stopped in front of Ivy, raising his chin, his voice intentionally loud and unyielding, as if speaking for the entire room to hear, "People like you don't have the right to stand here." No one objected. No eyes showed any sign of dissent. Instead, a few nodded faintly, smiles creeping up with subtle implied approval, like whispers of agreement in the air. Patricia, her face meticulously made up, her smile cold as frost, turned her head to size Ivy up from head to toe. Her gaze slid over the faded dress, the simple cloth bag, the worn-out flat shoes, and the deep brown skin, as if each detail was a slap in the face to the standards she worshipped. Finally, her voice rang out, sweet as honey yet sharp as a blade. "That dress, that bag, that skin." Each phrase emphasized carefully, as if she wanted to tear apart every last shred of dignity Ivy had left. Then she let out a sneer. "This is not the kind of person Logan Thornhill associates with." Her words came like a direct slash through the decaying air of the grand hall, and this time there were no snickers, no avoidance of gazes, only a silent consensus, a thick complicity among those who believed they were born for the heights, while Ivy, in all her realness, was only meant to stand beneath their feet. Trevor Monroe, Logan's distant cousin, a man accustomed to fawning over the powerful and trampling the weak, didn't miss a chance to flaunt his cheap ego. He raised his champagne glass, swaying in his hand, and took a few steps closer, then loudly pointed to a small door leading to the kitchen at the end of the hall. "Hey, sweetie, the kitchen's over there." This time, the laughter wasn't a loud burst, but a quiet, venomous chuckle, like the growl of a predator pack preparing to tire out their prey before landing the final blow. Elise Carter, not even bothering to hide her snicker, placed her hand over her mouth in a fake gesture, then whispered to Clara Simmons, "She probably thinks this is some charity job fair or something." Clara laughed, her phone never stopping its frantic movement, capturing every unmoving expression from Ivy. Then, with the speed of someone too familiar with manipulating online crowds, she quickly edited the clip, added mocking background music and a spiteful caption. "Lost maid, crashes billionaire's will reading. Epic fail." Within seconds, Clara's phone was flooded with notifications, likes and comments pouring in rapidly, and the wolves out there, those who had never met Ivy, never known her, joined in the hunt, aiding in the cruelest mental assault she had ever endured. And Ivy, still standing there, motionless like a carved statue, not trembling, not shouting, not shedding a tear, only her deep brown eyes remaining wide open, quietly like the ocean before a storm, silently recording every face, every glance, every word. Those invisible knives carving deeper into the unseen skin of her being. Gerald Hayes folded his arms, his voice low and heavy, like a final judgment. Truly, the biggest joke in the history of Thornhill Estate. Patricia, standing next to him, tilted her head, her eyes never leaving Ivy, whispering just loud enough for everyone to hear. If Logan were alive, he'd be ashamed to death of this, letting someone like that into his home. And this time, the phrase "someone like that" needed no further explanation. For everyone in the room, soaked in perfume, money, and fake pride, understood that it referred to her skin color, her humble origins they despised, her old dress not carrying a single luxury brand they deemed a sign of inherent worthlessness, to everything Ivy represented, the existence of someone who didn't fit the rigid class structure they held so openly and shamelessly in their hands. No one in the room wondered who the girl really was. No one stopped to ask why someone like Ivy was there at Logan Thornhill's will reading. No one, because in their eyes she had already been condemned the moment she stepped through that door, by her skin, by her dress, by the silent, proud demeanor they couldn't fathom. And amidst the fake, sparkling chandelier lights, amidst the whispered laughter like the breath of the dead, Ivy Walker, the black girl with eyes as deep as the ocean, still stood there, quietly like the darkness before dawn, silently collecting every cruel word, every contemptuous glance, every invisible indictment that, soon enough, those judging her would have to face in the fairest rage they had ever experienced. Because in this game, Ivy was never the hunted. She was the one waiting for the moment of judgment. As Ivy stood motionless, her deep eyes like still waters before a great storm, the crowd around her seemed to be stirred even more by that silence, a silence that was not easily subdued, not easily bent, not easily shattered like they were used to seeing from those they deemed inferior. And then, like a predator who had caught the scent of blood but was not yet satisfied, Marissa Reed, the woman dressed in a bright red gown, and who had crowned herself with supreme authority in today's gathering, stepped out from the group near the fireplace. She strode forward with long steps, her high heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, each step like a hammer pounding the tension in the air, threatening to snap it apart. Marissa stopped in front of Ivy, not even bothering to conceal the contempt in her eyes. Then, in a deliberate and provocative motion, she reached up, arrogantly touching the faded cardigan draped loosely over Ivy's shoulder. Her fingers lightly brushed it, as if inspecting a forgotten old item at a flea market. Her voice rang out, blunt and sweet, like pouring acid into the air. "This isn't a charity house, sweetheart. Get out before you become the joke of the whole family." No one shouted. No one made a scene. With just those words, Marissa cut through any remaining layers of politeness in the room. The silent agreement of the crowd around her, slow nods, smirks, quiet murmurs of approval, came together as a weighty force, pressing down on Ivy's small, resilient figure like a stone, trying to crush her. Ivy's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag, a subtle movement barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But in that moment, if anyone could feel it, they would sense an earthquake quietly rising from within her body. A rage that did not speak out loud, a pain that did not flow into tears, a pride as enduring as steel forged in fire. But she didn't leave. She didn't bow her head. She didn't utter a word of justification or plea. She simply stood there, like a tree with roots deeply anchored in the cold ground of this mansion, letting the wolves howl and trample, but refusing to let them uproot her. Marissa, unsatisfied with the silence, took another step forward. the distance between them now only measured by breath. The strong, expensive scent of her perfume hit Ivy's nose like an invisible weapon, armed with hatred and arrogance. Marissa tapped her finger on the strap of Ivy's bag, as if confirming one last time that the item before her was not worthy of being present in this space, then turned away, her gaze sweeping over the crowd as if expecting silent applause for her public humiliation. And the crowd, as if reminded, immediately complied with brightened looks, cruel smiles blooming like toxic flowers in a dead garden. No one spoke aloud, but the entire room seemed to echo with an invisible sound. Agreement, applause, and the demand for the black girl in the old dress to disappear immediately, to retreat in shame, to fall before the threshold of power they guarded like arrogant jailers. In one corner of the room, Clara Simmons quickly recorded the entire scene of Marissa's touch on Ivy, her eyes sparkling with twisted joy as she captured a golden moment to fuel the social media frenzy spreading beyond the mansion's doors. Elise Carter whispered to Trevor Monroe, her mocking laugh unable to hide her excitement. "She probably thinks silence will save her, poor thing." Trevor chuckled, the sound grating in the room already thick with cruelty. "Let's see how long she can endure." Gerald Hayes crossed his arms, nodding slowly like an old judge who had heard enough to deliver a sentence. Patricia Hayes only smiled, but in that smile was a universe of contempt, a death sentence with no trial. The entire room had now become an arena, one side in perfectly tailored suits and dazzling jewelry, and the other only Ivy Walker, in her faded dress, worn flat shoes, and eyes as deep as the endless ocean. But Ivy didn't bow her head, she didn't step back, she didn't leave. And that moment when the scrawny black girl, amid a whirlwind of insults, cruel words, and venomous glares, still stood tall, calm, unbroken, unintentionally exposed the true face of the entire room, of all those who gave themselves the power to judge and humiliate others based only on the color of their skin and the clothes they wore. Because, in that moment, anyone who was perceptive could feel it. The weak one was not Ivy Walker. The weak ones were those who needed to trample on others to feel a little higher, but they didn't realize it. Not a single one of them. And the real storm still awaited them. As the last of the mocking laughter still lingered at the corners of the mouths of those who saw themselves as the elite, as the disdainful glares had yet to leave the silent figure of Ivy Walker, the large door at the far end of the grand hall creaked open, the sound heavy, as if even the old house itself felt weighed down by what was unfolding within it. Arthur Grayson, the Thornhill family's head lawyer, a man long accustomed to the underhanded battles of hidden wealth and deceit, stepped in, his gait measured, holding an old leather briefcase everyone knew contained what they most longed for, the final will of Logan Thornhill. In Grayson's hand, a large envelope, sealed with red wax, bearing the Thornhill family seal, lay quietly like a judgment that was about to fall. His hair, silver white as ashes, caught the faint light from the crystal chandelier above, making his steps in the grand hall seem heavier, more solemn than ever before. Immediately, the room, once as loud as a marketplace, fell silent in a collective, suffocating breath. The fragmented laughs and sarcastic remarks shattered in the air, leaving only the soft April wind passing through thick glass windows, carrying with it a cold, silent chill that swept across the room. Clara Simmons quickly stuffed her phone into her pocket, her gaze briefly flickering with uncertainty. Elise Carter smoothed her dress, trying to regain her composure. Trevor Monroe set his drink down, clasping his hands in front of him like a student waiting for a good grade. Meanwhile, Gerald and Patricia Hayes straightened up, their faces regaining the cold, indifferent expressions of investors who had walked through countless corporate takeovers and family feuds. But among all of them, no one bothered to glance at Ivy, the black girl still standing silently in the corner of the room, her small figure partially obscured by the shadow of the large stone column near the window. If any eyes briefly passed over her, it was only filled with restrained contempt, as though with just one more valid reason they would push her out of the room with force. Arthur Grayson walked to the long ebony wood table at the center of the room, placing the briefcase down with a slow, deliberate motion, as if preparing the stage for the grand play that was about to reach its final act. He removed his glasses, gently wiped the frame with a silk cloth, and then put them back on. His aged but sharp eyes swept over the faces, trying to conceal their greed with false smiles. When his gaze passed over Ivy, it only lingered for a brief moment, too quick for anyone to catch, but enough for the most perceptive in the room to feel a vague unease stirring within them. Preston Reed, standing near the window, frowned in discomfort, and nudged Marissa with his elbow, as if asking silently, "Did he just look at her?" Marissa shrugged slightly, pursing her lips, her sharp eyes glancing at Ivy one more time, this time with a fleeting wariness. But then she shook her head, reassuring herself that someone like Ivy couldn't possibly be involved in Logan Thornhill's inheritance. "No way." Arthur Grayson raised his head, his voice warm and resonant, filling the room still thick with greed. "Good afternoon, everyone. We are gathered here today to fulfill the final wishes of Mr. Logan Alexander Thornhill. His will, fully signed and notarized, is currently sealed in this envelope." He placed his gnarled hand upon the envelope in a ritualistic motion, causing everyone present to hold their breath in unison. Every gaze suddenly became tense, as though the very survival of their fates hung on the seal of that envelope, on the scribbled words Logan had left behind. In the taut atmosphere, Ivy remained standing, gripping the strap of her bag, her eyes following Grayson's every movement without blinking, but there was no sign of greed or nervousness, just a calm as deep as the ocean, and something silently powerful waiting, like a tiger in wait. Arthur Grayson began to pull out a small silver knife, carefully slicing through the wax seal. The sound of the knife scraping through the dry wax was faint, but in the silence of the room it rang out like a gong announcing the arrival of a judgment. And in that moment, the brief moment when the envelope began to crack open, every eye, every longing, every suppressed fear that each person had been holding back surged to the surface, blazing like a fire ready to consume everything. Only Ivy remained standing there, silent as a bystander, but her eyes, if anyone were to look closely, shone with an unusual light, as if she had already foreseen everything that was about to unfold, and the cold wind blowing through the old window frames carried with it a faint sound like a whisper, the whisper of change quietly sweeping across Thornhill Estate. The change that no one in this room, except for her, could stop. As soon as Arthur Grayson cut the wax seal, a suffocating tension swept through the room, carrying with it a sense of impending doom that clung tightly to the shoulders and eyes of everyone present. No need to read the contents, just the unusually calm and composed demeanor of Grayson, combined with the mysterious presence of Ivy Walker, standing silently in the corner of the room, was enough to stir their greed into an open, blatant anger. And the first to erupt, like a fire ignited by gasoline, was Gerald Hayes. He, who had been pretending to be composed only moments earlier, suddenly jumped up from his seat, his face flushed red, his trembling finger pointing directly at Ivy, his voice booming so loudly it echoed off the ancient stone walls. "Imposter! Definitely trying to scam money. There's no way Logan would have allowed someone like her to be involved with the Thornhill estate." In that moment, the room seemed to split in two. On one side, the surge of anger from those worried about the inheritance they had long planned for. On the other, the still figure of Ivy, as silent as a stone pillar in the desert. Patricia Hayes, not wanting to let her husband face the fury alone, stepped forward, clutching her expensive crocodile leather handbag, her eyes blazing with hatred as she looked at Ivy, then coldly added, her sweet tone chilling, "She's probably hiding fake documents in that cheap bag. Someone check that bag." The mocking laughter and murmurs immediately flared up like a wildfire spreading across dry grass. Those who had previously kept neutral expressions began to waver, joining in with their eyes, their poisonous whispers, their silent but filthy complicity. Trevor Monroe squinted, muttering just loud enough for those around to hear, "Just rummage through that bag and you'll know right away. Beggars are always good at hiding scams and old junk like that." Elise Carter, standing behind Clara Simmons, threw Ivy a disgusted glance, then nudged Clara, signaling her to continue recording the scene, as though this was a priceless comedy that they had to preserve as evidence of their self-proclaimed righteousness. Clara Simmons quickly adjusted her phone, pointing the lens at Ivy, her finger poised to capture the moment when the crowd would drag Ivy out of the room as though she were a thief caught red-handed. In Clara's mind, the venomous captions and mocking hashtags began to form, like arrows ready to strike. The atmosphere in the Thornhill Mansion's grand hall had now become so heavy, so stifling, thick with anger, prejudice, and the fear of losing their entitled rights, that the well-tailored suits and dazzling dresses seemed like nothing more than cheap disguises for hollow, petty souls. The shouts demanding, "Throw her out! Get rid of the imposter! Check that bag!" grew louder and more frequent. No longer isolated remarks, but a swelling wave of fury that rolled through the room. Fists clenched, eyes burning with hatred, footsteps began to close in on Ivy. Like a spontaneous trial where there was no judge, no rules, only a bloodthirsty crowd playing the roles of judge and executioner. And amid the chaos, Ivy Walker stood still, not shrinking her shoulders, not stepping back, not uttering a word of defense. Her eyes, those dark brown eyes, remained calm, steady, deep, as if she already knew everything that was about to happen, and was not afraid. Arthur Grayson, having silently observed from the moment the envelope was opened, remained like an ancient statue, sharp despite his age. Only when the crowd began to rush forward, surrounding Ivy, preparing to turn everything into a public humiliation beyond repair, did he slowly raise his hand, his palm open, a simple yet commanding gesture. Grayson's voice, low but as firm as steel, immediately cut through the crowd, freezing the air. "Enough! Silence!" The shouting stopped abruptly, as if snapped in two. Footsteps that had been charging forward halted mid-stride. Eyes, burning with fury and fear, turned to Grayson, confused and furious. He repeated, this time slowly, each word like a nail hammered into the marble floor beneath him. "This is a legal will reading. Any disruptive behavior will be recorded and could be prosecuted under the law. Do you want to lose more than that?" The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of thunder. The crowd hesitated, uneasy, stepping back, but their anger and suspicion still simmered beneath the surface. They hadn't given up, but neither dared challenge Grayson's authority. In that moment, Ivy stood still, her head held high, her eyes no longer just resolute, but beginning to glimmer with something else, a light of justice about to descend, irrevocably. And those who had just clamored to throw her out, those who had yelled to check her bag, those who trembled under Grayson's power, would soon realize that today's will reading was not just a battle for inheritance, it was a trial. a judgment. And they, them, the ones who thought they held the power, would soon realize they were the ones being judged. The silence, after Arthur Grayson's request, was not merely a fleeting moment, but stretched into a thick, oppressive curtain that covered the entire Thornhill Hall, making each breath feel heavier, more labored. The crystal chandelier above still shone brilliantly, but its light now had none of the former radiance of glory. It was cold, like the moonlight falling on a graveyard. Grayson, unhurried, slowly opened the will, his aging yet steady fingers gently brushing over the paper like a silent ritual, causing every gaze, every greedy heart in the room to hang suspended in a state of suffocating anticipation. No one spoke. No one dared to move. The crowd, who only moments before had been loud and angry, calling for Ivy Walker's dismissal, now seemed imprisoned in a gigantic glass cage, only the faint sound of wind outside the window whispering through cracks, like a curse silently screaming. Arthur Grayson's voice, old yet firm, rang out through the space. No need for volume, but still cutting through the layers of pride and the fortress of prejudice built within this room. According to the legal will of Mr. Logan Alexander Thornhill, signed and witnessed 3 years ago at the law firm Grayson and Barnes, I hereby declare. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room, meeting each tense face. Some, like Gerald Hayes and Patricia, had already begun leaning forward, as if trying to pull every word from Grayson's mouth, while Clara Simmons was even gripping her phone tightly, preparing to record what she was sure would open a new chapter of glory and wealth for herself. That Mr. Logan Alexander Thornhill, Grayson continued, his voice as even as the toll of a death knell, has left no assets, shares, real estate, or financial interest to any of the family members present here, nor to any partners or advisors associated. A moment of deathly stillness. A silence more terrifying than any scream. All sounds in the room, the gentle clink of glasses, the soft sighs, the scraping of heels on the carpet, suddenly disappeared, as if the entire room had been swallowed by an enormous vacuum. The faces of those in the room went pale. The ghost of terror, doubt, and unrestrained fury passed through every pair of eyes, every trembling lip that wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Preston Reed clenched his fists so tightly that the knuckles turned white, his eyes fixed on Grayson as though trying to find a crack, a mistake, a chance for redemption. But the old lawyer calmly turned to the next page. Grayson, not allowing the shock to subside, immediately dropped the second bomb, his voice steady and sharp as a cold scalpel. All of Mr. Logan Alexander Thornhill's personal assets, company shares, real estate, intellectual property, and all existing and future assets, with an estimated total value of over 90 billion USD, will be transferred to the one person he trusted, loved, and chose as his legitimate heir. A breath caught in everyone's throat. A heartbeat skipped in their chests. His lawful wife, Ivy Walker. Her name echoed through the room like a thunderclap in clear skies. No warning, no mercy, no chance to prepare. In that moment, every pair of eyes that had once looked down on, mocked, and despised the black girl in the faded dress snapped toward her, as if for the first time they truly saw her, but not with pity or mockery as before, but with terror, panic, the complete collapse of belief and pride. Clara Simmons dropped her phone, the sharp crack of it shattering into the silence. Marissa Reed clutched her mouth, her eyes wide as if about to explode. Trevor Monroe staggered back a step, the wine spilling from his glass, but he didn't care. Gerald Hayes shook his head repeatedly, muttering meaningless words as though trying to wake himself from the nightmare unfolding before his eyes. And Patricia Hayes, who had sneered at Ivy's cloth bag just moments ago, now stood frozen, her hand clutching her handbag so tightly that the glossy leather wrinkled like it had been burned. Ivy Walker, the one they had mocked, trampled upon, and tried to throw out of the room like a beggar, an impostor, was now the one holding everything they had once thought they were entitled to inherit. Wealth, power, prestige, all of it. But Ivy remained unmoved. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't flaunt her power. She simply stood there, still holding her old, worn bag, her eyes as deep and silent as the still waters, absorbing the collapse of every face before her without blinking. And in the deathly silence that enveloped the room, only the April wind, blowing through the ancient window panes, continued to speak, like a funeral song for the illusions and pride that had shattered on the cold marble floor. In the moment, Ivy Walker stood motionless in the middle of the room, filled with light, but also heavy with new shadows, as the thunderclap that was her name still echoed in the ears of those who had once scorned her. Arthur Grayson, with the calm demeanor of one who had witnessed countless collapses, did not allow anyone in the room to flounder in desperate denial. He quietly opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents that had been prepared in advance. The air in the grand hall thickened to the point it felt as if it could be sliced. The eyes, still dazed from the initial shock, immediately fixated on Grayson's every move, hoping, vaguely, that there might be a mistake, a misunderstanding, a crack in the door to escape. But the gaze of the old lawyer remained steady, cold, offering no openings. To avoid any doubts or disputes, Grayson began, his voice clear, each word ringing like a hammer striking an anvil. Mr. Logan Thornhill left complete verifiable evidence of his legal marriage to Miss Ivy Walker. He flipped open the first page of the file, holding it up for all to see. This is the official marriage certificate, certified by Essex County, New Jersey, dated June 14th, 7 years ago, signed by both parties, along with 2 independent witnesses. The sound of the paper rustling rang sharply, cutting through the quiet panic that began to stir in the crowd. Before anyone could react, Grayson continued, pulling out the second page. This is a copy of the wedding photograph, taken at Newark City Hall, verified with time, location, and the identities of the 2 main individuals. The photograph has been verified by an independent image analysis expert. He held the photo high so everyone could see clearly. A youthful Logan Thornhill, in a simple suit, smiling happily beside Ivy, the graceful black woman in a modest white dress, her eyes sparkling with a light money could never buy. A small, choked sound escaped from somewhere in the crowd, quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence. Grayson, not allowing the atmosphere to cool, turned to the next part, pulling out another set of printed papers, his voice even, like a funeral drumbeat. This is a joint bank account statement for Logan and Ivy Walker, a secret account at Sovereign First Bank, opened immediately after their wedding, with regular transactions and balances showing a long-term and stable financial relationship between the 2. A murmur began to rise in some corners of the room, mixed with fear and despair. Grayson didn't look up, continuing. And here is a collection of handwritten letters by Mr. Logan Thornhill to Ms. Ivy Walker, preserved in their original form, with handwriting and ink verified by an independent forensic analysis. He held up the thin sheets of paper, each ink stroke, each word filled with love, respect, and gratitude that Logan had for his secret wife. The woman he chose to love for the rest of his life, not for status, not for appearance, but for who she truly was. Clara Simmons, her hands trembling, tried to hold on to her phone but failed. In a clumsy moment, the phone slipped from her hand, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack, shattering into pieces like an omen for what was about to fall upon her life. No one looked at Clara. No one helped her pick it up. All eyes were now fixed on Grayson, as if waiting for the final blow. Then Arthur Grayson slowly pulled out a small silver USB drive from his inner jacket pocket, plugged it into the laptop set up on the table. He didn't say anything else, just nodded lightly, and the large screen at the end of the hall flickered to life. The murmurs in the room died instantly. On the screen, an image of a simple wedding ceremony appeared. Outside the city hall, the golden afternoon sunlight shining on Logan's simple suit and Ivy's pristine white dress. They were smiling, holding hands, exchanging rings in front of two friends, Sarah Ellis and Michael Reed, vivid witnesses no one in this room could deny. The video captured Logan's smile as he leaned down to kiss Ivy under the white floral arch, the sincere applause of their two friends, the gentle yet firm hand squeeze Logan gave her. Moments that could not be faked, could not be fabricated, could not be denied. The atmosphere in the room, once heavy, now collapsed entirely. There were no objections, no more whispers, only the silent horror falling over every head, every eye. Those who moments ago had stood in judgment, now like puppets with their strings cut, adrift in the storm of truth. Arthur Grayson turned off the video, pulled out the USB, and placed it back in his inner pocket in a silent yet authoritative gesture. He raised his head and looked around the room, his voice low and heavy like the final blow to the crumbling gate of arrogance. That is all the evidence, and I repeat, Ivy Walker is the only lawful wife and the sole heir of Logan Alexander Thornhill. No one replied. No one dared to raise their head. Only Ivy, still standing there, her eyes calm, as still as the surface of a nighttime lake. Yet, beneath that serene exterior, an undercurrent of justice was silently rising, ready to sweep away all the deceit, cruelty, and rot from the world they thought they ruled. The room remained enveloped in a thick silence after the irrefutable evidence had just been exposed, and in the moment when everyone was still submerged in an inescapable shock, Ivy Walker, who they had once considered nothing more than a lost ghost, a filthy outcast intruding on their world, began to move. Slowly, without haste or showiness, Ivy stepped forward, leaving the dark corner where she had been standing since the beginning. Her footsteps echoed softly on the cold marble floor, each step like a hammer striking the chest of every person in the room. Her faded linen dress fluttered with each step, yet her figure remained strangely steadfast, as if the very space itself had to part for her, as if all gazes, whether filled with hatred or terror, were irresistibly drawn to her. When Ivy stopped at the center of the grand hall, beneath the massive crystal chandelier shimmering overhead, she lifted her head, letting the light sharply illuminate her face, accentuating the deep brown eyes, as unfathomable as a bottomless abyss, eyes that had patiently endured all the insults, all the disdainful glances, all the cruel humiliations from humanity. And then her voice broke the silence, not loud, but resonating, not angry, but cold enough that each word she spoke seemed to slice through the mask of deceit that filled the room. "I didn't come for money," Ivy said, her voice so calm that it rendered those who had just screamed to kick her out suddenly speechless, their breath choking in their chests. "I came to see who among you truly loved Logan, and who only loved his wealth." No one responded. No one dared to sneer. No one dared to curl their lips. Each word from Ivy landed like a hammer strike against the decaying wall of arrogance they had built for so long. And with each strike, that veneer cracked, exposing faces pale with shame, anger, and the brutal truth they could no longer escape. Marissa Reed, who had confidently walked up to tug at Ivy's faded cardigan, now clutched the hem of her red dress, her gaze wavering between hatred and an unspeakable sense of shame. Clara Simmons, the granddaughter who fantasized about social media glory, couldn't even look Ivy in the eye, her trembling hand brushing aside the broken phone fragments scattered across the marble floor like a child caught in the act of doing something wrong. Trevor Monroe, who had mocked her and pointed to the kitchen, now looked as white as a sheet, his eyes dazed, as though he had just woken up from the most harrowing nightmare of his life. Gerald and Patricia Hayes stood frozen, their eyes desperately searching for one another, as if hoping that with a single blink, all that was happening before them would turn into an illusion. But Ivy stood there, shoulders straight, her calm gaze sweeping across the room, looking at each face one by one, neither with hatred nor pity, only a quiet judgment, heavier than any accusation. She continued, her voice not rising, but growing sharper, like a knife slicing through silk. I stayed silent, not because I didn't hear what you said, but because I wanted to see what you would reveal when you thought no one was watching. A chill swept through the room, not from the wind outside the window, but from the truth, bare, cold, and impossible to erase. Ivy slightly tilted her head, her gaze lingering longer on the group that had been the most aggressive. Marissa, Clara, Gerald, Trevor, Patricia, Preston. She didn't need to name them. They knew. Each of them knew exactly what they had done. I've seen it all, Ivy said, her voice lowering, no longer sharp as a blade, but heavy like crushed stone. The contemptuous glances, the cruel words, the glee in humiliating someone you thought was beneath you. A long, drawn-out silence followed her words, as if the entire room had just exhaled all the air. No one laughed. No one dared to justify themselves. No one dared face the girl they had once tried to erase from this room as if she were nothing more than a stain. And in that moment when Ivy Walker, in her worn dress and scuffed shoes, stood proudly amidst the ruins of ambition and deceitful faces, everyone realized that the true strength in this room had never been in the ones who adorned themselves in glossy facades. It had been her, only her. The one they had looked down upon, humiliated, cast aside, but still stood tall, still held her head high, still made an empire of power bow down before the truth. And the storm had not yet ceased. As Ivy Walker finished her cutting words, the room still sinking in collective silence, Ivy slowly reached into her faded cloth bag, the bag they had mocked, humiliated, and considered evidence of poverty, and pulled out a small remote control. No one reacted. No one understood what was happening. All they saw was Ivy, with a chilling calmness, pressing the middle button, and in the next moment the large screen hanging on the wall behind the conference table lit up, its blue light flickering in the dim room, like an electric wave cutting through the heavy air. On the screen, it was not documents or old wedding videos that appeared. No, what appeared was something far more vivid, far more shocking, 1,000 times more explosive. Logan Thornhill. Alive. The man they all believed had died in a mysterious plane crash over the Pacific Ocean. The man they had mourned, grieved, and then secretly rejoiced over his death, seeing it as an opportunity to contest his wealth. Logan appeared on the screen, sitting in a covert surveillance room with a cold gray concrete wall behind him. The light shone sharply on his face, highlighting every detail, even as his hair had grayed at the temples. But his eyes, oh, those eyes, were sharp as a blade freshly forged in the fire, cutting through the room, through every person, through every lie, through every rotten thought hidden deep within them. and Logan spoke. His voice was deep, steady, resonating through the sound system, not needing to shout or threaten. Each word he spoke was enough to make the room chill by a few degrees. "I've heard everything," Logan said, his gaze sweeping the crowd like a sentence delivered by a stare. "I've seen it all." He paused, letting those words sink into every person's skin, then continued, his voice as cold as the winds from the Arctic. "Every word of contempt, every look of disdain, every mocking laugh." Each of Logan's words was like a hammer striking down on the ruins the people before him had built, only to collapse under their own greed and cruelty. Marissa Reed, once a symbol of arrogance and pride in the family, took a step back, her lips trembling, her hand instinctively gripping the hem of her red dress as though trying to hold on to a piece of dignity that had long rotted away. Clara Simmons, the granddaughter who once laughed gleefully at mocking Ivy, now stood pale as wax, her panicked eyes glued to the screen, as if hoping that if she closed her eyes tightly enough, everything would disappear. Trevor Monroe, Gerald Hayes, Patricia Hayes, each of them, those who had thought they would tear the fortune apart like vultures, now looked small, disheveled, pitiable under the cold gaze of the man they had once risked their honor to betray. Logan tilted his head slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto each face. "No excuse will save you." His voice didn't need to be loud, for the weight of each word crushed every excuse before it could even form. He leaned back, interlacing his fingers, the calm demeanor of someone holding all the power, then spoke again, each sentence like cold bullets fired straight into the withered hearts of the room. I and Ivy, knew from the start. We knew you would come here not to mourn, but to fight over what you thought was yours. We knew you would have no qualms about crushing anyone who didn't fit your arrogant standards. We knew you would reveal your true faces when you thought no one was watching. With each word, the room seemed to sink deeper into hell, and Ivy, standing just below the screen, facing all the eyes now filled only with panic and despair, said nothing more, only silently stared at each person, her gaze not bitter, not triumphant, but with a grim serenity of someone who had crossed through all the cruelty and still stood strong. Outside the window, the April wind blew harder, pushing through the heavy glass panes, lifting the silk curtains like ghosts waving. And in that wind, under the gaze of Ivy and Logan, a real trial was unfolding. A trial with no judge, no jury, because the sentence had already been passed, and the guilty had already confessed through their actions, words, and glances over the course of all this time. The storm, now, had truly begun. As the screen remained brightly lit and the cold wind outside the window continued to blow through the ancient stone walls, Logan Thornhill, with eyes sharp as blades, scanned the room one last time in the storm of truth that had torn it apart, then leaned forward, his hands placed on the table. His voice rang out, deep and heavy, like the tolling of a death knell. "The will reading today," Logan began, each word seemingly etched into the marble floor beneath everyone's feet, "is not just for the division of assets." He paused, his gaze lingering on the faces still stunned, pale from fear. "This is a test, a trial, designed by none other than Ivy, my wife." His voice remained steady, void of any gloating, only a deep disappointment in each word, like a teacher who had seen the students he once hoped for turn out to be nothing but thieves. The room fell silent. Those who had once seen themselves as the elite, Preston Reed, Marissa Reed, Clara Simmons, Gerald Hayes, Patricia Hayes, Trevor Monroe, one by one, were torn from their veneer of nobility, revealing their true, pitiful, shameful faces. Logan slowly stood, his figure, even through the screen, looming like a cold, unyielding iceberg pressing down on the room. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to raise his hands. Just his voice, his eyes were enough to deliver judgment. "Those," he continued, his voice low and firm, "who mocked, insulted, and humiliated Ivy, the woman who loved me unconditionally, who stood by me not for money or fame, will be completely removed from this will." The words "removed" rang out like a hammer, striking the hearts of everyone standing there. Grayson, now standing by the table with a brief list in hand, ready to announce, let Logan finish delivering the sentence in his own way. Logan didn't soften his tone. His eyes were sharp, like a sword cutting through silk. Preston Reed, Marissa Reed, Clara Simmons, Gerald Hayes, Patricia Hayes, Trevor Monroe. He read each name decisively, like reading off the names of those defeated in a war they hadn't known they had already lost. Each name spoken was like a bowing head, a choked sob, a painful gasp they could not hold back. Clara Simmons staggered, her hand gripping the edge of the table, her pale lips trembling uncontrollably, as if she were trying to fight the dizzying reality that had just crushed her life. Marissa Reed gripped Preston tightly, but Preston had let go, his face ashen, his eyes vacant, like a soulless corpse. Trevor Monroe, who once considered himself blood and power beyond question, now stood a trembling ghost, muttering meaningless words, his eyes lost like a child lost in the market. Gerald and Patricia Hayes, who had once boasted about buying the Thornhill estate to renovate it to fit their stature, now stood frozen, their eyes wide, staring as if they had just witnessed their entire world shatter before their eyes. Arthur Grayson, not allowing the suffocating silence to drag on, stepped forward, his voice even, void of any emotion. According to the additional clauses signed by Mr. Logan Alexander Thornhill, the individuals just named will lose all inheritance rights, access to assets, and any financial or honorary privileges related to the Thornhill estate. His voice echoed through the room like the shrill bell of a funeral. Effective immediately. Each word fell like the final nails in the coffin of their greedy dreams, their petty schemes that they had quietly nurtured for years. No one said a word. No one cried out loud. No one dared to object. Because they all knew the insults, the disdain, the cruelty they had poured upon Ivy Walker that day had already been imprinted into the surveillance tapes, into Logan Thornhill's gaze, into the history of the Thornhill family. There was no way to erase it. No escape left. Ivy Walker, the black girl who had once stood silently in the corner of the room, now stood firm in the center of the light, her head held high, her eyes calm as she looked down at those who had once scorned her, without the need for any threats or revenge. The greatest punishment was to let them live the rest of their lives in the nightmare they had created for themselves. And in the cold wind blowing through the ancient windows, the storm of justice continued to howl, sweeping away all that was rotten, decayed, still lingering in the old Thornhill estate. Grayson wasn't in a hurry, nor did he make any loud gestures. He simply continued his work with cold indifference, reading off each name that had been struck from the will, like an unavoidable sentence. Each name sounded like an accusation, a judgment for those who had wielded their ignorance and arrogance as their most powerful weapons to attack someone they deemed weak and useless. Preston Reed. Grayson's voice echoed, cold but clear, without a hint of pity or leniency. The guards immediately stepped forward, their steps firm as they escorted Preston out of the room. Preston's face turned pale, his hands trembling as he tried to grip his collar, but nothing could stop the inevitable journey he had brought upon himself. The storm had finally arrived, sweeping away the man who had long been accustomed to using power to crush those weaker than him. The people in the room watched silently, their eyes no longer filled with hatred, but with an indifferent coldness. Preston's world had crumbled, and now no one cared to look at him. Marissa Reed. The next name Grayson read out was like thunder rolling in the silence. Marissa staggered forward, her trembling hands clutching the table, her face as white as a ghost, her mouth agape but unable to utter a word. Her once proud steps had faltered. Now she was nothing but a shadow, stripped of power, stripped of privilege, with nothing left but humiliation, a pile of ashes from a life full of ambition. Clara Simmons. Grayson spoke the name, and like a powerful gust of wind, all eyes in the room turned to Clara. She was no longer the confident figure she once was. The crowd that had once viewed her as a symbol of rebellion and unique beauty quickly evaporated, like a bubble bursting under the cold gaze of those around her. Clara's eyes were glued to her phone, unable to look away from the notifications scrolling through, the cruel, venomous comments and hashtags tearing through her social media like a storm. Her phone seemed to collapse with each passing second, each minute. The platform she had once considered a tool of power now became the knife severing all connections, casting her into an unutterable loneliness. "Take it down," Grayson ordered calmly but firmly. A guard moved forward, coldly snatching the phone from Clara's hand, forcing her to leave the room. Clara could only stand there, saying nothing, unable to resist, silently walking out. The people in the room, having shifted from doubt to cold empathy, no longer saw her as a star, but as a failure, a living example of the price of arrogance. "Gerald Hayes?" Grayson continued, without a shred of mercy. Gerald stood up, his face once filled with the marks of prosperity now showing sheer terror. He had once thought he would be the final victor, but now, in front of everyone, he was left with only the traces of a fallen man, someone who had failed to maintain the power he once held. Staggering, Gerald was escorted out by the guards, unable to make a sound, unable to scream. The arrogance he once displayed had disappeared, replaced by silence, a silence he could not escape, like a man drowning in the pool of his own ambition. Patricia Hayes. As if Grayson wanted to prolong the tension, he did not skip over this name. Patricia stood upright, her gaze vacant. She had once been a symbol of the elite, of an unreachable grace. But now, that arrogance had vanished, like a ghost. The guard approached, extending his hand as if ready to drag her away at any moment. Patricia could only stand there, her once proud eyes slowly losing their arrogance, seemingly unable to accept that she had been eliminated from the game she had once believed to be invincible. Trevor Monroe. Grayson spared no one, his voice gentle but clear, as harsh as a hammer. Trevor looked around, unable to believe what was happening. All that he had been, all that he had believed to be true, was now utterly destroyed. With heavy steps, no longer confident, Trevor walked out, a shadow of despair in the light of his life. He had nothing left but emptiness, his false memories of wielding power and arrogance to trample on others. The room fell silent. A strange silence, like a conclusion to the battle none of them wanted to admit they had lost. Ivy's revenge didn't require sharp words, nor complicated schemes. All it took was the truth, the courage, and a soul that could never be broken. In that stillness, each person left, pushed out like those with no value, and only Ivy Walker remained standing, unwavering, her gaze unshaken. A real storm had begun, but it was a storm of purity, sweeping away all the falsehoods, all the people who had once believed themselves above everything. As the large doors finally closed behind the false ones, escorted out of the room, and the sound of stumbling footsteps and desperate groans faded into the cold hallway, the Thornhill Hall was left in a quiet void, a silence that was completely different from the suffocating, brutal atmosphere that had once filled the space. Logan Thornhill, through the large screen, still sat there, his gaze steady, his cold face now softened just slightly. His eyes scanned the remaining few in the room. A small group, only 3 people, 3 faces silent but resolute, 3 flickers of quiet fire that had not been extinguished by the storm of greed. "Not everyone failed this test," Logan said, his voice deep but warmer, carrying a fragile light like the dawn after a storm. "The 3 of you, those who did not mock, did not humiliate, did not turn away, have shown me and Ivy that kindness, compassion still exist." His gaze slowly lingered on the 3 standing at the far end of the room. Sarah Ellis, the humble nurse, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still clear and filled with compassion, who had witnessed Ivy and Logan holding hands in their modest wedding 7 years ago, now stood firm amidst the ruins of the room, her gaze as warm as it had been on that first day. Michael Reed, the thin librarian with a worn cardigan and thick glasses, who had quietly greeted Ivy every time she visited the library, never once asking questions, never mocking, only offering sincere respect. And Anna Brooks, the petite groundskeeper, always with muddy gloves and a gentle smile, who was the only one to offer Ivy a glass of water when she quietly entered the will reading, amidst the scornful glares, without a word, without doubt or judgment. Logan nodded, as if each nod carried a profound gratitude. Sarah Ellis, Michael Reed, Anna Brooks. You have not only kept loyalty to my memory, but you have also preserved your own dignity when others lost it. Grayson stepped forward, on Logan's behalf, his voice clear, carrying a rare respect. By the decision of Mr. Logan Thornhill, as of today, Sarah Ellis, Michael Reed, and Anna Brooks will be recognized as honorary members of the Thornhill family. They will be guaranteed lifetime financial benefits, including housing, allowances, insurance, and the right to participate in the charitable activities that Ivy Walker will personally establish. No cheap applause rang out. No fake cheers filled the air. Only a solemn silence, a heartfelt emotion spreading across the room like a warm wave sweeping through hearts that could still be moved. Sarah Ellis raised a hand to cover her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears, her chest heaving with emotion she couldn't contain. Michael Reed gently bowed his head, his thin hand trembling as he gripped his glasses, as if trying to find something to lean on to keep from crying in the grand hall. And Anna Brooks, the small girl with rosy cheeks from embarrassment, stood still, her hands tightly clasped in front of her, her eyes wide with amazement and boundless gratitude. Ivy Walker, who had stood silently from the beginning, finally moved toward the 3. No longer any distance, no longer any boundary between master and servant, between the titles the world had once tried to create to divide people into classes. There was only Ivy, with all the gratitude and respect from the depths of her heart, extending her hand. Sarah was the first to take her hand, then Michael, then Anna. 3 hands, 3 hearts, 3 quiet but unwavering acts of kindness, now intertwined, like a silent promise that in a world full of lies and cruelty, there are still people who choose kindness, not for reward, not for gain, but simply because it is the right thing to do. Outside, the wind still blew across the misty hills, but inside Thornhill Manor, for the first time in many years, a true warmth returned, a light not from the crystal chandeliers, not from $1,000,000 checks, but from the hearts of those present. As the final handshake was released, and the warm gazes of Sarah, Michael, and Anna still lingered in the air, Ivy Walker slowly turned, walking toward the center of the grand hall. There, under the softening light of the chandelier, which now glimmered like the fading moon, the large screen still displayed the image of Logan Thornhill, the man who had stood by her through silent years, through storms, and had loved her with a love that needed no show, no judgment, only truth. No applause, no hollow sounds. Only a profound silence like a soft velvet carpet lifting Ivy's steps as she moved toward the light. And when she stopped, when her deep brown eyes met Logan's piercing yet warm gaze on the screen, the entire room seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained, two souls who had weathered life's tempests, now reunited like two halves of a long-lost puzzle. Ivy raised her hand, her fingers trembling slightly from emotion, lightly touching the screen as if reaching out to Logan himself. From the other side, Logan also extended his hand, his strong yet gentle fingers responding to her in a gesture that needed no words. Between them, there were no certificates, no wills, no confirmations, because love, honesty, and loyalty had already become the strongest and most undeniable proof. A few minutes later, amidst the faint sound of the wind sweeping through the ancient windows, a small door to the side of the hall creaked open. Logan entered, flesh and blood, not through glass, not through a screen, but in his true presence. No luxury car, no entourage, just a man in a simple suit, his leather shoes worn at the heels from months of wandering in the wide world. And as Logan walked forward, no one stopped him. No one dared to intervene. Ivy walked toward him, slowly but surely, and when the distance between them was only a few breaths apart, he took her hand. Not too tightly, but enough for them both to feel the real warmth from each other's palm. The entire room, the entire world seemed to shrink in that moment. Logan lowered his head, whispering, just loud enough for Ivy to hear. "We don't need wealth, nor fame. We only need each other. And a life peaceful enough so that you never have to bow your head to anyone again." Ivy did not respond with words. She simply smiled, the first smile of the entire long morning. A gentle yet profound smile, like the still lake reflecting the full light of the sun. Outside, the rolling green hills stretched under the April sky, bathed in sunshine. The light streamed through the window, casting long rays across the marble floor, creating soft streaks of light like a welcome mat for their steps. And when the last door closed, the door of the Thornhill Hall, the door to a dark tragedy of greed, arrogance, and betrayal, it did not close with regret, but with liberation. It closed a bygone era. It opened a new beginning. A beginning built not by schemes, not by conflict, but by honesty, by resilience, and by a love that needed no proof from any material possession. Logan squeezed Ivy's hand, leading her across the threshold, into the soft light of the new morning. Their shoes gently tapped the warm stone beneath the sun, leaving long, straight footprints stretching toward the vibrant green hills in the distance. A new chapter had begun, not needing grand promises, only a simple yet complete phrase that Logan whispered softly into Ivy's ear as they walked together toward the sun. "Let's go home." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share it with friends who might also need a reminder of love and justice, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring stories. Thank you for following along.